All right. Um, so let's get started. Then, hey, Sean, how's it going?
Hey, Zach. I'm good. How are you?
Good, good, good. So I'm thinking that this is going to kind of be an intersect between our simulation work group for the 1x stuff, but also the test group that I'm also a part of with Mamie over here is leading, and so we can kind of kill two birds with one stone because both groups are going to require this sort of service. So, what like we discussed on the call an hour ago, we can like provision multiple purpose-built test nets. I think that's much more effective and efficient. And rather than being public test nets, they're permissioned. So only those participants who wish to, take part in the test net can join. And we'll manage it and we'll provision all the nodes and configurations using our framework. So we could automate transactions. The nodes that we provision are going to be in the cloud environment, but our emulation engine is going to, with our emulation engine, we'll be able to inject like latency or packet loss or any realistic network conditions. So those nodes will actually appear and behave and perform as if they're geographically separated from one another. So we don't actually need a public testnet or a global testnet. We can control all of those parameters. And what's important about that is that the tests, the results are going to be deterministic because we'll have total control. So these are like practical tests. They're not, it's different than a simulation, right? Because we're actually emulating all of this behavior and activity. So that allows us to create, for those participants within that particular testnet, they can coordinate with one another to like establish something like a schedule that for like certain environmental conditions or test cases that they wish to play out. So for an example, for the test, like an example test plan that we use and we put together, and this should be done as a community because we've been working with sharding with ETH Research for like 5 months now, doing their tests for them using the same framework, and it's been working out pretty well. So here's an example. I'll drop this into the chat. Here's an example test plan that we came up with for them. So if we can all just collaborate and like we can have a test net per working group, and it's not an issue. It can be torn down and re-provisioned with with ease. So if we can, each test group or all the participants can come together and agree on like something like a test net that's similar to, or a test plan similar to the one that I dropped in, we can easily provision those test nets and they can be ephemeral, so we can tear them down, rebuild them, and we can collect all that data and do whatever we want. So I guess like what I would really want, like what I really need myself personally, is just I need to identify the specifications that we would want, and we should probably bring in some people from the different work groups to say what would be most relevant to them, because everyone has their own use case. So anybody feel free to chime in and ask questions or whatever.
I have a question about the data that goes in and out. How do people get access to the testnet to
Yeah, so we have our own, we have a GUI that has our own. Here, I'll drop it in the chat too. It's not going to display anything, but you could just log in using this link, and we'll just provide a username and password for each working group or whoever, however we choose to organize it, and that'll provide them with all that data. So additionally, we'll open source the GUI, right? It's not a big deal, and the Net Explorer and all that stuff that we made. And then people can provision their own nodes in addition to this testnet. So it's not limited to just our environment. You can participate. You can provision your own node with your own client, and as long as you have that, that same Genesis block, or you can join in the proper network ID.
Cool. Thanks.
So yeah, so you can run. So we can open source this GUI. You can run the GUI locally and just be listed on the primary one, or you could just log in and use this. So
So Zach, so this is Alexei here. So I just wanted to, I'm getting a bit confused. I'm sure that a lot of people are. So when you say working group, which kind of working group do you mean? Because I guess there's so many working groups that you might mean.
right.
Is it, what sort of, what kind of working group you mean?
Well, I was just talking specifically about like like EWASM or anybody that wants to test their particular client or DApp or protocol. But I was mostly thinking about like the 2.0 and 1x effort.
Because basically the way we have to think about, traditionally the test nets have been set up for like with a vision that basically you set it up, you put it out there in hope that somebody is going to come and do something with it, right?
Right.
Because if nobody comes and does anything with it, then it's kind of like there's no point to doing it, because if it's an empty network, just doing like mining blocks or whatever, it doesn't matter. So if I guess in your understanding, the testnet is something different. It's not something that you just put out and hope for people to come.
No,
Something more than that, right? So can
Yeah.
you clarify the difference?
So if you check out the test plan, right, that I shared in the chat, so we identified like the sharding, these P2P, the sharding P2P performance test plan pretty much is really kind of like a test for libp2p specifically. So we came up with like the system specifications, we came up with the test procedure, and then we identified the performance metrics that we wanted to measure for like libp2p. So like with this sharding situation, what's real important is timing, right? So validators have a particular length of time to subscribe to a particular topic and then begin broadcasting messages in relation to that topic. We need to test the limits of the client to understand whether libp2p in and of itself is a valid solution for sharding, right? So what we can do is we can do that at scale. So we came up with a whole idea when I was at DevCon. I met me and Kevin and Chiche had a meeting, and we came up with this whole series. So we're going to test the number of validators and observe how the number of validators affects these processes, and like the number of static nodes and the number of shards, all of these metrics that we test. And we go through it one by one in order, like in an organized and deterministic manner, in order to observe the effects of particular environmental conditions on performance. So one example that would probably be relevant to conversations you and I have had, Alexi, is like uncle rates, right? And the effects of uncle rates and what causes it, right? What causes those conditions, and how can we optimize with those conditions in mind. So this way we can isolate particular events and create repeatable processes that allow us to understand exactly what the cause and effect of these conditions are. So by employing this scientific process, like we can really be objective.
Okay, so basically, let me summarize, because so I wanted to make this clear that when you use the word testnet without lots of qualifications, people would usually understand this is the testnet where you throw things out and wait for somebody to come and use it. So I don't know, maybe it's more useful to have a word network emulation or something like that.
I mean, we could just call it emulator. I mean, for lack of a better term, that would be easier to understand than emulation, right?
Right. And
so it's the same idea of as a test. It is a test network. It's just
yeah. I understand. But just for the perception, because I got confused, so I'm sure that a lot of people will be confused.
Right. So I'm kind of proposing like we pretty much define what we consider testnets, because public testnets just don't work. You're depending on the participation of the public and the community and then when they do, the results are non-deterministic. You don't have any control. It's not repeatable.
Yes, I get it. But basically, for in your understanding, the test network doesn't just have to have these ensemble of computers connected with the network. They also have to be some sort of generator of traffic, generator of activity, right?
Yeah, so that activity
And
needs
that's
to be controlled.
exactly. So, but what I'm saying is that the generator of activity is probably like one of the most interesting things here. It's not the actual provisioning of the network, because you said that you can already do that.
Right.
So the generator of activity is the most important thing from my point of view, because
Yes.
depending on how you generate activity, you get different conclusions. And
Right. Of course.
so I would see if I mean, maybe I don't want to hijack your meeting, but I would just put it as for the document or for whatever. I put this as a very important bit. It's not just a test net, but it's also there has to be defined the activity generator.
Yes, of course.
It's just like on the dev call, the ephemeral test or ephemeral chain was being used as a keyword. And in this case, Zach, you also mentioned people can join using their own machines. So it is a test net of sorts.
Yes.
It's a very interesting mix of both the ephemeral and the peer connections.
Right.
So what, yeah, the assets actually that you could create, I mean, as the working group, as one of the products of this work is not simply how to provision them, but also to create this artifacts which will some sort of activity factories, which could be unleashed on any network you want. You could do it on Ropsten, and it doesn't actually matter whether it's Whiteblock or it's Ropsten or Rinkeby.
Sure.
It basically has to have some kind of activity generator that you can just point it anywhere and it will start doing things.
Yeah, so we have all of those libraries developed. We've been working with these internally for nearly a year. So these are the utilities and tool sets that we use in our service. Testing is a service offering, but we don't want to be a services company, right? We want to develop tools that are useful. So we have all of that available. I think that the core technology that's the most interesting is the emulation engine, because it has nanosecond accuracy and it allows us to emulate network latency and packet loss and blackout conditions. So we can actually implement like forking events, and we can observe how the network responds to those. And this is the engine that allowed us to do all of our tests on uncle rates, right? And trying to identify the cause and effect of uncle rates within the Ethereum network. So just for example. I think that, yeah, you're right. Providing a more concise definition, because a lot of people associate testnet with this big public entity that's kind of just a beast in and of itself, right? So.
Hey, sorry, I don't mean to just interrupt, but I've been working on Goerli with Opti and the rest of the crew there, and I mean, we've been calling it like an open testnet, even though we've just been doing it as purely network diagnostics and stuff, and we've like taken the network down and restarted at block 0, I think, a few times now. I don't think there's any issue actually just calling it a testnet and having it open, that it's just it might drop and come back on at any point.
Right, yeah, but then Alexei brings up a good point though, is like calling it a testnet will present some sort of some degree of confusion, because what the popular definition of a testnet is something that's actually different than what we're referring to, because there's actually intelligence within this testnet and the ability to like control. So it's kind of like an engine, like a test engine, like a network. I don't know. So, but yeah, I understand what you're saying too. I think, I mean, it makes
So if I think if this approach proves to be very powerful, and kind of it could potentially displace all the other definitions of the testnet, but it might be a bit
well, because like one example is, I think it was like a couple months ago, right? There was the big issue with like the hashing rate, right? With the Constantinople stuff, right? And everyone was like freaking out about that, and it was a big deal. But these are things that we could actually provision and control.
Sorry, what was the hashing rate thing? I don't remember that.
It was like 2 months ago or something like that. Something about like the testnet. There wasn't enough hashing rate to like.
Oh no, that was basically just that when we were doing a transition to Constantinople and Ropsten, there was nobody mining at that moment for some reason. and
okay.
nobody, no, basically miners. I don't think basically the miners who were mining the Ropsten, they don't not switch the software, so they were still mining the old chain, and
Oh,
nobody was actually mining the upgraded chain. That was the
but
problem.
that's on Ropsten, right?
Yeah, that was on Ropsten. Yeah.
So we could, but that's something that we could control, because we can determine, like, we can indicate how many nodes.
Well, you only can do that to a certain extent on the proof of work net, because because basically you either have to switch to the fake POW mode, which means that ignore the proof of work, or just do it. I mean, if you want to control everything, that you have to basically start mining yourself, which is
Right.
not easy process.
Well, we have tools that automate those processes, and we're able to use pretty advanced GPUs and minor GPUs within our instances. So we can like use like the Tesla GPUs, for example. Like what was it that we were using yesterday? It was like the V100, K80, and the K80 and all those. But anyway, so we can control the hashing that's in the network, right? And since it's ephemeral, we can tear it down immediately and then rebuild it. All of this is automated, so we can tear down the network. We can rebuild a network, provision accounts, do all of that in like literally like 3 minutes. Now, this is a process that used to take me hours every time I wanted to test, which is why I developed these tools. It was a huge pain in the ass. So we can do it with the click of a button now. So we can control all of those conditions, all of those variables, and really understand and have an objective view for what the cause and effect of different conditions are within the network. So that's just like an example. Like, you wouldn't need to depend on the coordination or participation of those who are using like participating. So just as an example. You there?
I have a question. So is it okay to share this test plan on public? I think this one is already sort of.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, it's public now. I mean, this isn't like a super professional test plan. Like I use, like, internally we have like a template. But this was just something that I've shared between my team and the ETH research guys that we've been working with. But yeah, feel free to share it, please. Yeah, and provide any feedback. But I mean, if we can come up with similar test plans that identify the specifications, the procedure, and the metrics that we want to observe, we can automate this entire process and run tests that generally take months or weeks, and get really valuable insight within hours. So.
That sounds really good to me. Would it make sense to prepare a sample or an actual test plan for some of the metrics that were spoken about before, like the gas limit and
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So the gas limit thing is something that we already have libraries to develop for, because we actually ran a lot of those tests when we were working on the UBIC project. So yeah, I think that what we were talking about, you and I, Shahan, when we were at DevCon, was like testnet for like benchmarking various clients. Was that what we were talking about immediately?
Yeah, to whichever limit the clients can be supported in the.
Yeah. So rather than having one testnet for all of those clients, if we really want to benchmark those individual clients, what would make most sense is if we had a test plan for each one of the clients and had a test, one of our test nets or whatever we're calling it, specific for those clients, and ran them, and then we compared the data sets, so that way they're each in their own isolated environment under the same conditions, right? So now we can identify exactly how one performs against the other, and this might actually be relevant to you, Alexi, and TurboGeth, right? So I think that'd be really useful.
I don't know, because at the moment, the things that I do specifically, they don't really sort of testable in this way. So I don't know.
With regards to your state rent, for example,
Yeah, yeah.
one example would be to just replay the network and assume that people have to pay rent, then you get metrics on.
Yeah, for this particular thing, you don't actually need a network simulation. You just need a state transition thing. So you don't actually need to build any network. So I'm doing it routinely on my computer. You don't actually need a network. What you need is a history of state, and just run your tracer through it. And this is how I produce some of the data. So I don't think that specifically for the state rent project, at the moment, we are so far away from the kind of needing to do this kind of simulation because there is no relation between the rent and any kind of network stuff. It's simply something to do with the state transition and with how the accounts change. So I'm sorry to say that, but it's basically not relevant to each other.
No, that makes sense that it's not connected to the network stuff. What do you have a specific approach you're using to replay?
So what I'm doing is that I have, so I'm using TurboGuess because that's what I kind of know can perform well. So essentially in the TurboGuess, because it's archive node, it contains the entire history of Ethereum state at each block end, which means that I can always start any, re-execute any block by just simply pointing so this is the database state, at this block, and then I'm just re-executing everything. And that's what I do to replay things. So I just take in the blocks, basically that they are also in the file, and then parse the blocks, find out transactions, and then just execute them again on the state. Or I can also simply just run it as if it was actually syncing a blockchain, but with the fewer elements, like without writing things out and everything. So I can do quite a lot of this stuff, but for none of these things I need a network. So I just do it with the.
Well, another thing you're talking about, and we're just brainstorming here. It's like
yeah.
If it doesn't work, whatever. We're just throwing things out there. But
no, the things that the reason I was talking about these things is nothing to do with the state rent, and also nothing to do with the EVASM, I'm sorry, but it was something to do with the more immediate things to test, which is essentially as we're talking about the increasing of the gas limit, what is going to be the
well, if the gas limit is increased right off the bat, like block time is going to have to be raised, or you're going to have a higher uncle rate.
No, that's fine. It's basically if you already know what the result is going to be, that's brilliant. So if you could just summarize that and then put it out, so that because basically what people are looking for is some sort of recommendation. It's like, okay, so if over next 2 months the uncle rate is going to go down, like while people are upgrading parity and everything, so then what do we do next? Do we recommend increasing block size, and how much, and are there any other things that we need to consider?
Here's some relevant research. I'll share this on the Ethereum Wizards group. Yeah, this might be relevant to that conversation.
Yeah, so I'll probably look through that, and it needs to be presented in a specific way. So yeah, we could have this research, but it has to be formulated as a recommendation, basically in 3 sentences.
Yeah.
This is what will happen if we do that. This is what will happen if we do that, and this is what probably, well, not exactly, but probably. So, and that's it. Basically, you just have to kind of extract it out of all this. And the research with the numbers and everything is simply backing that recommendation.
Yeah, of course.
That's what people will be looking for.
Definitely. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I agree.
If I can just wind the conversation back to your approach, Alexei, that you're using to replay the transactions, is that did you have to modify Geth to be able to do that?
Oh yes. So it's basically, I don't know if it's actually possible to do it in Geth I haven't tried to do it in Geth in any kind of practical way, because
So the reason why I ask is because perhaps we can try to replay the entire mainnet on some of these test nets, or some replace that state to do some of the testing.
An important consideration is how this process is affected by just essential peer-to-peer communication.
It's not really affected, sorry, because it's simply when you replay things, there is nothing happening on the, it doesn't matter what happens on the peer-to-peer level. It's just a simple state transition. Sorry?
It's an isolated process.
Yeah, it's just a state transition. It's like there was a state here and then the state there, and these are the transactions. It doesn't matter where there's anything going on this peer-to-peer level.
Yeah, that makes sense. Totally.
It would be a complete waste of time if you try to simulate it over the network, because
to move on to a different use case, like Terrence from Prismatic Labs is here, and I know that they're working on their own implementation of like beacon and sharding and all that. This would probably be highly relevant to their project. Terrence, do you have anything to add? Looks like you there?
Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you now.
All right, sorry, I was on mute. So yeah, we're mostly working with the core logic right now. So we're just trying to get a consensus layer working for the beacon node, and we're looking to have some sort of test net probably coming to March by the next year. And by test net, I mean so our definition of test net is our own beacon node can talk to each other, and then also the different clients beacon node can talk to each other. So that's our goal. We're not there yet, but right now we're just in a research phase to see what options we have to get that working.
Yeah, sure. That sounds similar to what we're doing with the ETH research group, kind of like evaluating various protocols and identifying what's going to be the most useful and relevant to the particular use case, I guess.
Yeah, and we're also working, we're starting to work with the P2P. Right now, we're working on setting up our own boot node and then like relay node, and then having our beacon node connect to it.
Yeah.
And that is as much progress we have on the networking side of things.
Great. Yeah, that's what we're working on too. Now that I think about it, we should probably publish some sort of data or put out a report on what we've done so far, because we've been running these tests for like 4 months already.
Oh, great. Yeah, that would be great. I'd love to talk to you offline in terms of progress, and then just like share with you guys the work that we have done so far.
Yeah, sure. Feel free to send me an email or hit me up on Gitter, and we can talk about it out separately.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cool. So does everybody have a pretty good understanding for what I'm presenting here? I'll assume yes. Are there any more questions or anything that requires further clarification?
What do you expect from us?
Well, I would like to, one, establish these test plans and identify like primarily the specifications that would be required for like the initial network that we build out or whatever it is, so I think that's something probably like Shahan and I and like the simulation group can kind of take. And then what would probably be relevant to you is collaborating with us on like that test plan or the procedure, I suppose, right, in accordance with like the work that you're doing, right, and in the Testnet group. So if you'd like to collaborate in that regard, you specifically, like the test group, we could all do that, because I think this is a good like intersect between the test group and like the simulation working groups. So
yeah, no problem. I guess right now for the test group, regarding the network part, we didn't touch it at all. And we had some feedback after Prague regarding that and questions. So yeah.
Yeah, so
There's
we
a lot
can
to do.
so we can address like the networking aspects, and like the practical implementations, and then we could work with you to establish like the procedures and standardize those procedures. I think would be a really relevant project for us to collaborate on. And this is going to just speed up the process of testing and building and figuring out what works and what doesn't work. I mean, we can reduce the development life cycle from like something that's like an 8-month endeavor to something that's like 2 months or so I think that we should all collaborate on that and get something going and standardize it. And I think that's going to do a lot of good for the space, and that's going to help us optimize and grow and progress, so.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, I think something that would be super useful would be like, so here's what I tried and what worked and what didn't.
Right.
So at least people have some ideas about different approaches and don't repeat what was wrong, or maybe they tried, it didn't work, but they missed something. So you can generate some discussion around that, because currently there is, well, at least on the Ethereum research / test part, there is no discussion regarding the networking part. For the Nimbus team, we do plan to have some kind of test, but by the end of December. But it's only within our small, with our clients. So to have something working, and then we'll see how to expand that with others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we can do that with like create like an ephemeral one of these like ephemeral networks and try to like test that work in that regard. So
yeah, though I'm pretty sure we'll start having discussions, just like how people are discuss the hard forks after they take place, and depending on what the interest is, the data may or may not be kept around, like the raw data for those failed tests or past tests.
yeah, well, we should have some sort of repo where we can just share all of the raw data and kind of like reports, high-level reports, and like basic summaries of any tests that we run. And then based on community input, we can run a different test series to focus on one particular metric or something, whatever. So
Yes.
I think, that should be based on the input of the community, and we can provide it, we can manage it, we can like put out all the data and get it going. And I think it's pretty useful. I mean,
should we have a GitHub folder or our own repo?
Yeah, that would make sense. Something that public that we can share wherever that is, and I don't care. So I mean, if you want to set it up or handle that, I mean,
Yeah, sure, will do.
Cool. All right. So yeah, so I think a good plan of action would be then, one, establishing that repo and figuring that out. Two, trying to like get the word out and solicit further input from various working groups that are looking to try to like perform practical tests, and getting those test plans written out. I think what we could start on more immediately is just creating like a generic type of testnet that we're referring to, and also I guess coming to the conclusion as to whether we're going to refer to these as testnets. What are they otherwise? I mean, I think.
Well, like, I mean, I don't mind using the word testnet. That's fine. It's just like, it doesn't want to be more complicated.
Yeah, it should be it should be, we need to specify that this is like what I'm proposing here is essentially a new way to think of test nets, right? And think of the testing process. So that's much more optimal and efficient. So
You just want to, before we go, I just wanted to get another comment. I think there's when these things like this come into play, like this approach to testing, it reminds me on the things with the fuzzing as well. I think Casey was mentioning that before the fuzzing was introduced, he was very skeptical about because it's kind of like really fiddly things. But then he was impressed when the fuzzing actually found real bugs in Byzantium. So I think something similar might be happening here is that I'm pretty sure that a lot of people either don't understand it or skeptical. That includes me, by the way. But until that happens, until there is actual use where you demonstrate or we demonstrate that this actually have found a real issue and has solved the real problem.
Right.
So I just want to say that they might need to have a little patience or specifically looking at these places where other tools fail, but this particular thing will be able to find something.
No, I mean, you and I, Alexei, spoke about, like, I initially brought this up to you over a year ago now. I've been working on this stuff for a long time.
So it's basically, to my understanding, I will be completely honest with you and everybody else, is that I'm still not, I don't understand completely how this is going to work and how this is going to help. Sure. And but I'm remaining kind of mildly skeptical, but at the same time, I just keep the conversation going. So that please be patient, and then you might find the way for this to really shine.
Of course. And I appreciate your skepticism, and I'm a big proponent of the concept of the 10th man. Like, if everyone is in agreement, it's the duty of the 10th man to disagree. And I guess, so I think that, skepticism and critique is very welcome and warranted. I mean, all of this makes sense to me because I've been working in the performance testing space for a long time outside of blockchain. And these are pretty standard testing procedures. I'm just trying to take standard tests that are
I basically, my kind of advice would be to try to be a bit more kind of inventive about use cases. Don't expect people to bring the use cases to you,
of course,
but go after them yourself, because basically what you're saying now, that can you bring me your test plans, but I have no idea what I should bring to you.
Right. No, I agree. So what we can do is have more meetings with like different working groups. I'm staying up to date on everything that's going on, and I'll share all of that. And I understand that the burden of proof lies on me, and it's or not me, but like anyone that's on the people that are making the proposal. I just think that this use case and this methodology is going to be apparent to some people, so they may already have some ideas and things that they want to test, right? So some people understand right off the bat, and some don't, right?
Yeah, that's definitely true. Yes.
So so I do understand and agree with what you're saying. I'm going to do my part and continue to like bring up ideas, right, and present things. But also if you guys can just think of it and try to figure some stuff out. And I would encourage you to check out our existing body of research, because we've covered quite a lot.
Well, I'm going to be on the lookout. So if I see something where I see the definite match, as I think it was with the testing of the uncle rate potentially, but maybe we need to find something else as well. So yeah, I will let you know, obviously, but yeah.
Yes. So one thing that I'm really personally I'm interested in testing is our various consensus mechanisms. So that was kind of like that's a really good use case for our framework. So that allowed me to effectively test like EOS, like DPoS, various implementations of consensus. So those are just things that I like to focus on because it's, because I enjoy them. And so that's what I know best.
And so basically there was what I think, I'm not sure how much of like a nanosecond precision you need for these things, but one of the things I keep thinking about is the idea of sharding is that essentially quite unproven to me. Again, from a skeptical point of view, is that basically if you want to do this computation when your blocks are sharded and your state is sharded and execution is sharded, how much actually the overhead is going to be, and would you be able to actually do useful computation more efficiently than you would do on an unsharded system, and whether you have forgotten something, or something like that. But I think we're quite far away from even testing that on your framework.
Yeah. With respect to ETH1X and ETH2O roadmaps, I mean, we'd probably want to target ETH1X stuff, and then when it comes to ETH2O, it would be, say, beacon chain related topics and then because the sharding specs are still coming up and the beacon chain is a bit more ahead in its specification. Yeah. So we could schedule the tests that way, and then of course there will be gaps, and so if anybody has a sharding,
or you can go to talk to Vlad as well because he doesn't have a beacon chain at all.
So another practical use case is like stress testing and load testing, like testing dApps, for instance, or smart contracts, how they interact with one another, how they respond to various volumes of transaction, and transactional like overhead, right? So we can do all of that as well. So we can deploy like smart contracts in our environment.
Well, let me just, so the smart contracts themselves are not doing anything in the network. So they're virtual things.
Yes.
So what you will be testing is actual software which runs the network. So
yes.
The examples are this recent one with the Bitcoin SV, right? Bitcoin SV, the test, stress test, which is basically demonstrated that at a certain rate, the block started to propagate really, really slowly. So, but that probably wouldn't be a smart contract thing, right?
No, that wouldn't be, but still not practically testing the smart contracts, but I suppose like the activity around them and the behavior and the response of the network. And also throughput is something that it's pretty standard for us to test. It's just throughput under various conditions and all of that. So.
Hey, Zach, got a question for you, Marlo. For the beacon chain stuff, for instance, would we be able to like use your framework? Like, is it open sourced, or would it more or less like you're choosing the clients?
So right now we have a SaaS application that's available. It's not open source yet. We're developing an open source alternative because our current SaaS application involves some proprietary IP. But we are developing an open source alternative that's probably going to be like, 3 months, 4 months out and actually developing that and releasing it. But yeah, our SaaS application is very low cost. It's pretty much like covers the, I mean, we have like offerings for like a few $100 a month, and that essentially covers the cloud costs and all that. But what we're talking about here though is something that we're going to engage like separately and provide as a service for like the Ethereum Foundation. And I think we're also working with like consensus on all this. So if that answers your question.
Yeah, I was just curious if we could like, when we're ready on our side, if we could test ours. So that's cool.
Yeah, so you can sign up for the SaaS platform if you want something that you can totally control, and it offers all of this stuff in a controlled environment. Or you could hold out and wait for the open source version. But realistically, like the SaaS application is so low price that it's going to cost you more money to try to match the same scale using any open source tools than it would to just pay for a fully managed service that works right out the box.
Makes sense. Cool.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll leave that choice up to the market to decide.
Yeah.
So I'm not here for business. I'm a technologist. So
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Thanks.
yeah. Cool. All right. So
so we have a plan. I've taken some notes. I'll share them with the group. I don't think I have everybody's contact info. So Zach, if you want, just share my email with everyone.
Sure. Well, I just kind of, I didn't invite anybody to this. I just kind of dropped a link in the core dev chat.
All right. So
But we have our respective channels for working groups. Like, I think this is mostly people.
Maybe drop a link on the issue on like, what is it, 223? I think is the issue you made.
Yeah.
It's in the getter. That probably would make the most sense.
Makes sense.
Cool. Yeah. So
233. Sorry.
So I think that yeah. So Shahan and I will do this, and then maybe do you want to work together on some additional stuff for the test group, for the 2.0 test group?
Who are you asking that question to?
Sorry, yeah, was it for me?
Yeah, I was talking to you, yeah. Because I know I'm working with you guys as well, but I haven't been as active since DevCon because it's been pretty.
Well, it's not just you; it's everyone. Because I guess we are trying to keep up with the spec. Because if we are not in line with the spec, we can't really test anything.
Right. Yeah.
So I guess that should be something for a bit later. And yeah.
Well, yeah, I think we should still collaborate on, and this is something we'll talk about offline, but like standardizing those procedures. So, but yeah, I think that we should we'll follow up on this conversation at the next simulation working group meeting. Shahan, I think, did you schedule that for the 11th?
I haven't scheduled anything.
Oh, I got an invite. Wait, where is it? Oh, I thought I just got an invite from you this morning.
That was the invite for today. I sent an updated invite to today's call.
Okay. Well, there's a part that says Vanessa will present.
Yeah.
Wittgenstein.
So that's Vanessa presenting Wittgenstein, which is the simulator for the network protocols that Nicola and Vanessa are working on.
Okay, cool. So I guess maybe we should just work together offline, put some stuff together, and then we can have another simulation working group meeting, like maybe like next week or before the holiday at least. And then we can put something concise together to present at the core devs meeting next, I guess we said the 4th.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I think,
right, cool.
Even if we wanted to just say record something and share it, because we'll probably be doing stuff in the meantime.
All right, yeah. And then in the meantime, anybody else that has any questions or concerns or wants to like collaborate or has anything at all, just feel free to hit me up on like Gitter, or shoot me a message on Telegram or email me or whatever, and let's get something going. If you don't understand or whatever the use case is, thanks for joining, and let's just keep it going. I mean, there's no harm in exploring these alternatives if they could potentially result in some benefit, right? So
yeah, that sounds really good. Thanks very much, Zach. Much appreciated for setting up the call and inviting your folks as well.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank all of you. Appreciate it. I'll talk to you guys offline then. I guess I'll upload the recording of this meeting, and I'll drop a link in the core dev chat so we can all check it out and reference.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you all.
Thanks a lot. Cheers.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thanks. Cheers.